All right, guys, that's it. It's 12:30 Central. Welcome aboard. This is Bill Murphy. I'm your host for Technical Talks, our webinar series we've been doing for over 3 years now. I'm going to go really quickly through the intro today because we have a fascinating interview. I want to save time for that and even have a little time at the end for questions with our guest speaker. Again, I'm Bill Murphy with ASP Enterprises, Quick Supply Company, Bowman Construction Supply, and Cascade Geosynthetics, part of the Hale Holdings family of businesses. And I'm here in Des Moines, Iowa, where we did have some winter weather. Let me click on this, make sure it works. There we go. Yeah, Hale Holdings family owned right here in central Iowa, but we have companies that are part of the family across the country. We're blessed with many, many customers, actually coast to coast, but primarily through the Midwest and out through the Rockies, out to the Pacific Northwest. And we have a wonderful sales team. So look at this map really quickly and see where we are in your state, whether we are Cascade, Bowman, ASP, or Quick. And for those of you who are regulars, you know we have a lot of solutions, a lot of products, a lot of things that we can offer for civil site development. And we try to focus our Technical Talks webinar on one category or the other. Today, it's not like that. We're doing something different through this winter. Instead of having manufacturers reps come on and talk about specific products or projects, we're going to talk with a friend of mine who's a professional engineer and more. And he has fascinating experience, not only at his job at Wright Water Engineers, but also around the globe. And I'll let him tell you more about that. But just as a reminder, we're here to help you even through the winter months. We'll get you what you need, where you need it, when you need it. And I'm going to go really quickly. And if you stay on to the very end, you're going to hear from Dr. Andrew Earles himself, because he's going to join us a little bit later. So once we get through this recorded interview that we did last month, we did it ahead of time because we weren't sure about travel schedules, weather, and some other personal commitments and professional commitments we both had. Stay on till the end, and we're going to have him help answer some of your questions live, as much time as we have to do that. So with that, sit tight, get ready, and let's check the volume on this.
Well, want me just to kind of start and dive into this, and I'll start with an introduction and then go from there, Bill. And if you want to stop and ask me questions as we go along.
I love it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all. My name is Andrew Earles, and I am the Executive Vice President with Wright Water Engineers in Denver, Colorado. I've been working on projects related to stormwater and hydrology and hydraulics for over 25 years now at Wright Water Engineers. And I've enjoyed working with Bowman over the years on a lot of erosion and sediment control projects. So I've known Bill Murphy for quite some time, and before him, Ron Bowman was a good colleague. I think I said Ron's name wrong. Yeah, Ron Bowman is just kind of Bowman. That's how ubiquitous Bowman is. Yeah, but Ron was a good colleague too, and so I've really enjoyed working with your company over the years too, Bill. And glad to spend a little time today telling you about some kind of unique work that we do. And my bread and butter work is doing engineering design and infrastructure and the kinds of projects we all work on. But I'm really lucky here at Wright Water Engineers that we kind of have a specialty area of our practice that is really related to historical preservation and interpretation. And that's work that I've been involved with since I started at Wright Water Engineers in 1999. And it's a practice that I've helped to grow over the past 25 years into what it is today. And, this slide that I'm showing you here just really shows a few of the sites that we've worked on. You have on the upper right, left-hand corner is the site and near the Angkor archaeological area in Cambodia called Nam Bakeng that I'll tell you a little more about. And then in the middle at the top is a 17th century Buddhist temple in Thailand called Wat Chai Wat Hanaraham that we helped with some flood risks. And of course, on the top right is Machu Picchu, which is where really Ken Wright got started on all of this work. And I've been there to help him with some of that work a few times. And then on the bottom right, we have Mesa Verde, which is a site that some folks in Colorado might have visited. They're really amazing, interesting cliff dwellings. But even before there were cliff dwellings, there were settlements in the bottoms of the canyons at Mesa Verde that managed water using reservoirs. And then finally, the picture in the bottom there is actually from a city called Guangzhou, China. It's in southern China. And this is an ancient archaeological site that they believe is one of the very first royal Chinese water gardens. It dates back about 2,000 years, and they think that they had a pond here for raising turtles that they would eat. So those are some of it, and I would just say that we do a lot of this work as Wright Water Engineers, especially when we're doing more of the preservation type projects where we're actually doing engineering to help preserve these sites. And we also have a public nonprofit foundation called the Wright Paleohydrological Institute. And we do a lot of work through that too, although that work is much more aimed at kind of historical interpretation more so than restoration. We do a lot of the restoration work really as Wright water engineers and as we're professional engineers. So so that's kind of a quick introduction to me. And let's look at a few of these slides, though, and I can tell you a little bit about some of these neat sites. So I thought I'd start out with just kind of showing you all the different places that we've worked, and I think this includes most of them. And you can see in the Western Hemisphere, we really worked. Mesa Verde has been really neat project. We've studied 3 ancient reservoirs there and published a few books. Machu Picchu obviously is an area where we've done work. Helping to locate the water sources for a lot of the fountains they had there. We've also expanded that work to other areas in what they call the Sacred Valley of Peru, including sites called Sacsayhuaman, which is in Cusco, Peru, and some other sites that run along the Urubamba River, where the Inca built different types of terraces and water management systems. And then in Europe, we've worked on a few different sites. My colleagues Patricia Flood and Wayne Lorenz have worked on a lot of these. Patricia Flood has done some investigations at Alhambra in Spain, which is a very old, really neat water management system built by the Moorish people. And then you have Barbegal in France, which was an ancient Roman mill that my colleague Wayne Lorenz has studied. And Wayne is actually, these days, has spent for the past 10 years or so, has been doing a lot of work at Pompeii. So I don't have pictures of that today, but that's another area where we're actively working. Olympia, Greece was an area where Ken Wright did some studies on an ancient flood wall. And I'm going to tell you a little bit today about my trip to Babylon, Iraq, which was related to the Ishtar Gate, which is a really neat archaeological feature there. And then, of course, we have some projects in Asia, including the project in Thailand I mentioned. We've done some work related to restoration of a teakwood monastery that's in Mandalay in Myanmar. And we've done work at Angkor, Cambodia, and in China. So we've really, done work many places around the world with this. Two things that I would say is that in many cases, we've had a very good client for this work. That's been the World Monument Fund. And, their mission is to preserve these ancient sites and world monuments across the world. And we've been really lucky to get to work on several World Heritage sites with them. So it's really an honor to be able to be working with that organization. The other thing that I would say is that these projects are really collaborative and interdisciplinary. I'm just the engineer. I'm only one part of this. And I might be, I might think I'm an important part, but there are a lot of other things that go into these projects related to archaeology, anthropology, cultural considerations. It's not engineering in isolation. It's engineering as a part of the bigger picture. And my job is usually to figure out how that engineering fits into the bigger picture in usually some pretty unique cultural settings where you don't necessarily have the types of construction equipment we have or methods that we would have in the United States. We need to work with local people and local materials and local methods, which is often challenging, but it's also very rewarding.
I love it because this is not the stuff they teach us in school, at least not at a bachelor's level. So
Yeah.
There's a lot of people watching these and a whole lot of people that'll watch this when it lives on in YouTube, who is exciting for us. Some of us don't get out of our part of our state, as a consultant. Maybe we work in an adjacent state or with another office in another part of the US. But to see this map is just incredible. I love it. I already liked you as a person before I even knew about this work you did. So it's just a perfect fit. I'm so excited to hear some of your stories.
Well, thanks, Bill. Well, I've been really fortunate to get to visit a lot of these places, and believe me, that's not lost on me. I'm very grateful and feel like I'm very lucky to have had the opportunity to do this. But it's really, a real pleasure for me to be able to understand the history of my profession, the history of engineering, and how people have been doing this for thousands of years. And it gives you a real appreciation for what you do today. But it's also kind of humbling when you realize 1,000 years ago that there were people doing the same things you do today with a lot less to do it. So it really is. It's I think it broadens your perspectives in unique ways when you get to see how engineering has been done in ancient societies across the world. So Well, this one I'll tell you a little bit about. I thought I'd pick out a few of the projects to just talk about, and this one is one called Wat Chai Wat Hanaraham in Ayutthaya, Thailand. That's a real mouthful, but we call it
Yeah.
Wat Chai. And this is a 17th century Buddhist shrine. It kind of follows your typical Buddhist architecture where you have kind of a central prong that is the tallest structure there, and then it's surrounded kind of geometrically by these smaller prongs or stupas that come up. And this is a really neat site. I actually got called into this site after a big flood in 2011. And this site sits right next to a river called the Chao Phraya River. The Chao Phraya River is the largest river in Thailand. And in 2011, it had unprecedented flooding. And, it got out of its banks. It flooded this site with about 2 meters of water. They had flood walls that were designed to protect the site, but they were just overwhelmed by this flood. And it just so happens that this is also, here's the site. This shows you the flooding that happened in 2011, and you can see the entire site was underwater. This compound across the river from Wat Chai is actually, I believe, a summer palace of the King of Thailand, or was at the time. And so it was very high visibility. And so they really needed to come up with a way to protect this site, because it's very important culturally. In this area, Ayutthaya, there are probably at least a half a dozen other Buddhist shrines, and they call this area the Venice of Thailand because it's cut through by rivers and canals. But preserving this, which has a lot of tourist value, but also a lot of intrinsic value to the local Thai people, is really important. And so this was the flood wall they had, and this collapsed when it got water stacked up above it. This is a picture from a couple months after that flood. And you can see they kind of had these hexagonal piers, and you might be able to see it in a couple of these photos. It's hard to see, but they had really, tiny rebar. I mean, much smaller rebar, and much, it was basically an ornamental wall. It was not designed to withstand 2 meters of water stuck up against the side of it. And when that happened, you can see that these piles and the tiny rebar they had in them just snapped, and the whole wall fell over, and it flooded the whole site. So we helped them to redesign an improved flood wall in this location that will stand up to a flood like that in the future. And in order to do that, though, we had to do some geotechnical investigations, because you're going to build a big foundation. You need to be sure that it's not going to sink into the ground and that it'll be properly supported. And so we actually went out and we did a full-scale geotechnical investigation in Thailand in 2013, and we did a number of test holes. Again, in the US, we pull up a drill rig and we just punch these things into the ground. It's a much more involved process in Thailand. We also dug some test pits. On archaeological sites, you have to be very careful and get proper permission to do any sort of digging at all. And when you do it, you usually find some really interesting, remnants of pottery and things like that in there from hundreds, if not thousands, hundreds of years ago in this case. So this was kind of the rig that we used for doing our geotechnical testing. And you can see they had this little motor here where they'd pull up the weight on a rope. They'd have their Shelby tube going into the ground. They'd lower it and smack it on the rope, and it would push it in a couple inches at a time. And sometimes two of these guys, you see the two ropes hanging down on either side, they would jump up and grab those and pull down on them to push it in a little further. But it takes a long time to bore 3 or 4 meters doing it this way. But they did, and it was good data, and we were able to design a good foundation for this wall. And we built that flood wall has now been built and is protecting the site. So another site that I have worked on in Southeast Asia is called Nam Baking, and that is in the Angkor area of Cambodia, which is really, honestly, one of my very favorite places I've visited in the whole world. The Angkor Archaeological Complex covers hundreds of square miles, and there are just amazing temples all over the place. And a lot of them are really concentrated in the area around this temple called Nam Baking. Angkor Wat, which I think everybody has heard of, the largest continually active Buddhist monastery or Buddhist temple in the world, is a kilometer down the road from this. And then another site called Angkor Thom, which is one you might have seen with a bunch of carved faces in the stones, is a kilometer up the road from this. And so this is one of the earliest structures at Angkor. And actually, it's interesting because most of the structures in Angkor are built pretty low in the floodplain, but this one was actually built on a hill. That's what Nam means. Nam means hill. And so this is a temple on top of a hill. And you can see this is kind of the general layout. Here's our Nam Baking, where you can see the hill. This is Angkor Wat, which is very famous. and this is Angkor Thom to the north, which is also very famous.
I
Now,
love
this huge feature
yeah.
you see over here, Bill, this was an ancient reservoir called the Western Beret. And this feature you can see over here, although it's not shaded in, was the Eastern Beret. And we believe that both of these, well, it's pretty well accepted that both of these were major reservoirs that helped to support this civilization while it was active here, 1,000 to 2,000 years ago.
Incredible.
They also think that one reason they may have run into some problems and the civilization didn't survive is that these things just got too big to maintain. So, if you build it, you got to maintain it. We all know that, right?
Yeah. Classic.
Yep. So, anyway, this is Nam King, and I got in there. I think it was in the middle of the rainy season, and so the first afternoon I got there, the way it works there is it doesn't just rain all day. It's usually sunny for most of the day, then the storms roll in the afternoon, and it rains really, really hard for a few hours, and then it goes, and then it repeats the next day. Well, the first day I got there, I was just meeting people, and sure enough, in the afternoon it started raining, and everybody headed into the shelter except for me. I put on my raincoat and I ran out and started taking pictures and videos and making notes on my map, because what I needed to do was to figure out how the drainage works around this temple. And there are a lot of areas. I mean, it's up on a hill, but it's a pretty flat platform up on the hill. And so the best way to figure that out was to actually see, where does the water go? And so I was able to map out these drainage paths. I was able to map out sump areas where water ponds, but it was just like, within 24 hours of arriving there, I had a perfect drainage map because I gotten out in the rain and gotten wet and looked into actually document where things go. And I think the people in Cambodia thought I was crazy, but once they understood what I was doing, they totally understood that. And so, the issues that they have there at this particular temple is that it relates to kind of this picture at the top where my cursor is, where you see this kind of orangish stone. That's a stone called laterite, and it's a clay stone. And it's very common in Cambodia. It's used in a lot of buildings, and they like it because you can cut like perfectly square blocks out of it, and you dry them, and they have good strength. They're good building blocks. It's like a, kind of like a Cambodian cinder block almost, if you want to think of it that way. But the problem is when it gets wet, it has really high plasticity and it deforms and degrades. And so the way these temples were built is, if you look in the left-hand corner here, is you can kind of see a laterite core here. And what they would then do is they would then get sandstone, and they would put kind of the cover or the wrapper around these temples using sandstone, and they would put it really close together, and the laterite would fill it and shape it inside, and then they would use the sandstone for the finishing layer. Okay, well, over hundreds of years or even dozens of years, this can happen. With people not using this, you have tree roots that get in there. They push apart the sandstone a little bit. It shifts a little bit. Water starts to get in there, and then water starts to get in there. The laterite starts to degrade. Then the sandstone starts to fail more. And so really, the process is that this laterite's just degrading, and that's what they're trying to restore. And the way they decided to do this, WMF did, and this wasn't our design, they worked with a specialty designer for this, but they basically rebuilt half of this temple by putting in new laterite blocks, and then on top of the laterite blocks, they put an impermeable liner, so that even if the sandstone shifts a little bit, that they're not going to be letting water get into that laterite. Okay, well, if you do that, what's going to happen to the water that used to soak into the laterite, right? It's going to come runoff. And that's where we came in, is that they hired us to help design a drainage system surrounding this building, because they also have a lot of problems with erosion, as you can see in some of the figures at the bottom and the middle here. And so we were really, by putting in this liner, they were going to generate more runoff, and our job was to figure out what we could do to help them to manage that. And also, just before I go on to the next one, because I don't have like the design drawings in here, but we did end up designing, a kind of a subsurface drainage channel for them that kind of has these laterite covers on it. It's the kind of thing where the intent is to provide the drainage without anybody really knowing that it was there for drainage. And, I think they're still working on this temple. I think the drainage is probably one of the last items that will be completed. But this is a big project. It was actually funded by the U.S. State Department through a fund called the Ambassadors Fund that does work all around the world and really gives us in the United States a nice international reputation for trying to help people.
I didn't know.
So,
thank you.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's that one, Bill. Let's see. The next one I had is kind of this interesting one called the Nanyue Palace from Guangzhou, China. I don't expect a lot of people have been to Guangzhou, but if you've not been to Guangzhou, Imagine New York City, but probably even a little bit bigger. It's massive.
Wow.
I mean, it's, it's one of these Chinese cities that you probably haven't heard of that's bigger than any city we have in the United States. And well, in I think it was back in the early 2000s, if I remember the history correctly, the Chinese government was doing a project to install a telecommunications line in this area, and they discovered what's shown in this picture. They discovered a real significant archaeological site where there were ancient wells, there were ancient pipes, ancient water garden. This feature you can see going through here is a drainage channel. It goes into this pond, and they found an old wooden plaque with an inscription on it from about 2,000 years ago that had been preserved in the water that had the Chinese symbol for turtle on it. So they know that they were raising turtles here, which is kind of interesting. But this site is really interesting because it is literally like having an archaeology site in downtown Manhattan. And what their biggest challenges are, they have two of them here. One of them is that Guangzhou sits very close to sea level, and so you have sea level rise that's rising the level of groundwater and water that's getting close to the level of these archaeological investigations. So that's part of the problem. The other big part of the problem, though, is you just have urbanization everywhere around this, and that generates a lot of runoff that can soak into the ground. And so they're kind of getting squeezed between the rising sea level and the groundwater infiltrating in. And so we did a consultation with them to try and help them figure out some ways to manage that. And, a lot of it was just about trying to direct impervious areas to areas where they're not going to drain into the area of this building, but it also included looking at considering installing a dewatering system. The problem is that the Chinese had a big event coming up. I think it was like the Pan Asian Games or something, and they built this massive museum. It looks a lot like what you see here, but they didn't address the groundwater problems before they did that. So now they're trying to deal with that inside the building, which of course leads to all sorts of shoring issues and other things, much more complicated than if they'd been able to do that before they built the museum over the area. But it's a beautiful museum and a really amazing place to see. These are some shots from inside the museum. On the left-hand side, this is an ancient wooden pipe. Those are really neat. I've even seen some of those in Colorado hiking around in the mountains from, the early 1900s. And I think those were fairly commonly used even up until about the 1940s, to tell you the truth. And then on this side, which is really neat, I mean, we all know that the Chinese were really some of the people that first invented ceramics, but these are also ancient pipes. And what they would do is they would make these ceramic pieces in shapes of cones, and you could basically put one cone into the other cone into the other cone, and you end up with a pipe that looks like this that'll convey water. And so these are some really, really old pipes. There are also some really old wells on this site that were very interesting too.
Hey guys, this is Bill, just chiming in to remind you that you can submit questions via Zoom. I'm going to go ahead and resume this recording, but just like we do with any live webinar, you can go ahead and type in questions and then we'll get to them at the end of the video when Andrew joins us live. Thanks again. I hope you're enjoying this like I am.
The other ones I have in here, this is kind of a neat one. It's in Myanmar, or what used to be Burma. I went and worked on this one probably about 5 years ago or so. Burma's not a real safe place to work these days. So we were able to get in there and help them, and they've made some improvements. But we're not going back there anytime soon until it's a little safer. But this is a monastery called Shuenendajan, or SNDK, we call it for kind of an abbreviation. But what's neat is this thing is built entirely of teak wood. These are marble railings and steps here, but it's really carved out of beautiful teak wood and has these really ornate carvings. And the people and this is like a monastery. It used to be a monastery, and it still is, but it's a historic site now. But it's still part of this huge monastic complex called Atumashi. And so it's surrounded by about 6 other monasteries. And as a part of this work, we talked to all of the monks at all of the monasteries to find out what their issues were and how they viewed this monument. And so getting to talk to a bunch of monks was really a neat experience. I'll tell you a little more about that in a minute. Wow. But the concerns here in Myanmar with this structure are twofold. This could go and be destroyed very quickly if there were a fire. Unlike the United States, where we have codes and we have fire hydrants on every block, most of Mandalay doesn't have fire hydrants. They don't even have potable water supply. So if a fire breaks out in Mandalay, it's going to burn a lot of stuff. And so one of the objectives here was to try and do some rainwater harvesting to have some water that you could use for fire suppression during drier months. And that part hasn't been built yet, but we've built the first part of this. Okay, the slower death to this thing is by termites. And this thing has
Oh.
terrible drainage around the building, or I should say had terrible drainage around the building. And the termites just eat this damn thing apart. And so we were trying to manage the drainage. You can see these are some of the standing water right around these areas. The termites would basically just go right up these marble things right onto the teak wood and start eating it apart. And so we developed a plan that was kind of two-phase plan. And the first one was really related to doing some real good grading and flat work around this thing. I mean, we were getting down to hundredths of an inch or hundredths of a foot, but just doing everything we could to shed the water away from the building. That has all been constructed. It's been in place for about 3 years. And at least from what I've heard, the last time I heard about a year ago, it was working very well. And they're getting the water away from the structure. So the second thing that we were going to do, though, is that they have kind of this, I call it a boneyard right now on about a third to a half of their site that's just overgrown. And what we'd like to do is to take the runoff from this site and the runoff from surrounding areas and create a large pond back here. And that could provide some temporary water for the dry season for fire suppression. It would also be a way to just manage the runoff from the site, because what happens is there's a canal out here. And when this canal gets high, it will backflow into the site. And it's a filthy canal. And so what we want to do is to put a backflow gate on there. We want to hold the water from our site, which is a bit cleaner, and then release it back to the canal when the canal goes back down, and store some of that water for use in dry periods in the summer. So about half of this has been done. The other thing is there's a monastery right next door to it that basically has an open pit latrine that overflows into this site. So we were also going to design a septic system for them. But that, again, the first part got done, but then the conditions really changed quite a bit in Myanmar. And I'm still, really hopeful we'll be able to get back there and finish this job someday, but that remains to be seen.
I'll bet. Andrew, I bet a lot of our friends would be shocked at how many open pit latrines still exist in the world.
Oh my God.
There's a lot of places that they're doing the best they can, and they don't know how close they are to disaster. So
no, they just don't. And most places in this world don't have solid waste pickup. That's a really big deal. I mean, we just take it for granted that the garbage man comes by and hauls our stuff away every week. And most parts of the world, it just ends up in the nearest waterway. And it's really it's a shame. And unless you travel to places like that, you just don't realize how good we have it in the United States a lot of times, I think. So, but speaking of another place where they don't have solid waste pickup, that would be Iraq. And I think this is the only hotel I've ever stayed in where it had a bring your own toilet paper policy, which is kind of funny too. But luckily I found that one out in time to bring my own. But it was really this was a really neat place to visit. And what I'm showing you here is a feature called the Ishtar Gate. This was one of the main entrances into the city of Babylon. This used to be where you're seeing the bottom of this used to be the natural ground surface of the whole area, but it's built up over the millennia. And this goes back to the time of Nebuchadnezzar II. You can actually see cuneiform bricks that built this wall that have inscriptions from him in there that say basically this was built by Nebuchadnezzar II. So it's, it makes the kind of things we learned in Sunday school really come to life. I mean, they're real. The Babylon was real. The Tower of Babel was real. The story about everybody being scattered with languages might be a little a literary liberty there, but it was a real place. And I've been there and seen it. But this Ishtar Gate is really neat because it was kind of the iconic entrance there. And they're having some issues there. And the big issues they have two issues. One of the issues is that this is an area, and I think I have a slide here. Well, let me start here. It sits very close to the Euphrates River. And the Euphrates River, we all learned that's part of the Fertile Crescent. It gave the Babylonians the water they needed to develop irrigation and drainage practices. And it's still a great resource to the region to this day. But over the years, as you would expect on most rivers, the people of Iraq or whoever was ruling it when the Assyrians ruled it or others, they built dams and they raised the level of the river. And so the level of the Euphrates River next to Babylon is probably today easily at least 2 meters and probably more like 3 or 4 meters higher than it would have been back, when Babylon was actually an active place. And, for example, Hammurabi's Code, which was found here, I believe. That was, in a layer that's far below where we could get to today. It'd be underground water because of what's happened with the river, or at least some of those other types of artifacts are probably much lower. And unfortunately, in Iraq, there's really not much you can do about the groundwater today. I mean, one of the questions was, well, how can we manage the groundwater? And, the way, if you really had a lot of money, what you could do is basically go in and build a grout curtain along the Euphrates River and then dewater the whole damn thing. But, they don't even have running electricity in most parts of Iraq. So that's just something that's never going to happen, at least not for a long, long time. So, in terms of the groundwater, some of the issues they have is they have these really neat glazed mud brick structures. This creature you can see in this is what's called a mohushu. It's a mythical creature. It has kind of scales on the body. It has talons on its feet. It has a kind of like a serpent head and a tail of like a lion. It has all these. It's got a really neat kind of ancient creature. But what happens there is that the groundwater table is so shallow beneath here, and in Iraq it gets so hot in the summertime that if you get 120 degrees Fahrenheit and you have a groundwater table that's a meter below the surface, you're going to evaporate groundwater out of that groundwater table from the heat. And it pulls up the water, but it also pulls the salts up out of the soil. And that's what really damages these walls here. And so, one thing that we've looked at doing is that you can see kind of this concrete paving in here. That's not original. That was a drainage system somebody put in, and it used to extend all the way between the walls. And one of the things that we noted is that's really not letting this area breathe. I mean, what you need to do is give more area for evaporation, not less. I mean, if you have all this concrete and the only area where the water can evaporate is right at the edge of these walls, that's going to worsen your problems. So I think getting rid of this concrete part of it is actually going to be a big improvement for them. And then, we looked at some other options like, because basically these areas drain to sumps, and we looked at things like putting in solar powered pumps to help dewater and drain it out. But there are a lot of vandalism concerns. So really, I think the best we can do here really is, first of all, is just let it breathe, right? And that will help with the groundwater. And then the other thing is that we need to do a better job of managing the surface water, because this is an archaeological investigation, right? Which basically means it's a big hole in the ground. And archaeologists are not hydrologists or engineers. They just dig a hole. And, and when I went out there and started looking at this, I was like, wow, well, yeah, the groundwater is a problem. But what about all this surface drainage coming into here? You've got all these surface areas that drain in here, and you're getting trees and all sorts of vegetation growing up inside this area that you don't want to have. And, well, do some surface corrections. I mean, most things require a multi-pronged approach. And so we can let the groundwater breathe a little more, but at the same time, let's do some grading to direct surface runoff away from this depression. And so that's something that they're working on doing, I think, as we speak. So that was a really neat site, and that's the Mohushu I was telling you about. This photo that I have here, the big building in the background is actually one of Saddam Hussein's old palaces that he had built at Babylon, and it's been gutted, and people still go in there, though. It's really kind of an opulent, amazing place to see when you see how poor most of the Iraqi people are compared to the wealth that Saddam and his sons enjoyed. But the important part of this picture is not what's in the background, it's what's in the foreground. And these piles of dirt and gravel and soil you see here may not look like much, but it is the foundation of the Temple of Babylon, of the Tower of Babylon. This is what is left of the Tower of Babylon today. It's a really, really wide foundation. The Tower of Babylon is what we call a ziggurat, which is kind of the structure that goes up like a tower. And I have it on good account because I work with a Swedish archaeologist who reads cuneiform and has been studying this site since the 1950s or 1960s. And he has worked with others and Iraqis, and they have determined that this is really where the Tower of Babel used to exist based on all the ancient writing. And, one nice thing about Babylon is these people wrote a lot. I mean, they had cuneiform, they wrote all sorts of things. I mean, a lot of the writing is just receipts and real estate transactions, that they documented, but there is a really good written record to be able to understand where different features were there, which is unique compared to some other ancient sites. But to have such a good record of written tablets and things, it really helps archaeologists reconstruct where things were and when things happened.
That's so cool. I can't imagine what that feels like to be so close to a real place in history to a lot of us just seems like a history we've heard of, but it's hard to imagine it being real. So that's
Yeah, no,
awesome.
it really is. I mean, and we went to a place that was a little bit north of here where it was just what they call tells, T-E-L-L-S. It's like a tell that there's something there, right? And they
Yeah,
just look like these dirt mounds, right? But there are things buried beneath them. And I believe that the archaeologists that we were working with there told us it was like the house of Joshua or something, and it had just never been excavated. It's just sitting out there in the desert for somebody to go and explore and discover and interpret in the future when it's safe enough to do that in Iraq.
incredible.
But yeah, no, it's really, and the other thing is there are a lot of parts of Babylon that have not been fully explored. I mean, we see the Ishtar Gate, but within a couple hundred yards of the Ishtar Gate, there's an area they call the Old City that just has never been thoroughly studied. Just because it's been hard to do work there with the Civil War and strife and the Gulf War and all the other things that have been happening in Iraq for the past 40 years or so.
Wow. Andrew, I want to make sure that we're recording because I've gotten some calls since I'm having to do this through my phone. I want to make sure I didn't disrupt it. Is it
No,
still
it shows that it's still recording to me.
good? Because it would break my heart if it wasn't. I'm loving this.
No, it's still, you might need to do a little editing
Oh,
to the recording, but it's, it's still going. We're at 36 minutes. So
good. I love
good. Well, I think that actually brings me kind of to the end of the presentation though, Bill. So
Hang
we
in there,
covered a
friends. The
lot.
video keeps
I'll tell
going.
you one kind of funny story just in closing. And this is a photo from when I was in Myanmar, in Mandalay. And that's me on the left. I had crutches because I had broken my hip. But the guy standing next to me is a guy named Alexei Kirashenkov. And Alexei actually studied as a Buddhist monk in Myanmar to become a monk. And he is actually from the Soviet Union. He is a professor at Moscow State University and a Buddhist monk, and he spent years studying there. But now he's back in Moscow teaching that. And he came because he knows the Buddhist traditions. He understands the importance of the site. And it was really, really neat to get to work with him. The guy on the right-hand side was our local contact with working with WMF, who was also very helpful. And then the monk in the robe, he was the monk that we called the monk with 3 PhDs. And he had like 3 PhDs in different topics. And he was also a really experienced photographer. And I think I mentioned, when we did this work, our site was, sat right in the middle of like 6 other monasteries. And so we had to get input from all these different monks surrounding us because we wanted to be sure that whatever we were going to do was not going to upset them and that it was going to be consistent with, the holiness and the special nature of the site. But well, so what was really interesting when we went to go visit the monks is you would go in and we visited, I think, all 6 of them in one day. Maybe it was over 2 days, I think, that we visited 6 of them. And so you'd go in and you'd kind of bow to the monk, and then, you'd sit down on the floor, and that's what the monk would do too. And you'd start talking, and then they'd have one of their little apprentices come out, one of the boys at the monastery, with a tray of drinks to offer to everybody. And you would not believe what they gave us to drink. It was Red Bull. I drank about 3 Red Bulls in one setting. And,
I
you may
love
not
this
know
part.
this, but Red Bull was invented in Thailand.
No
It is
way.
very popular in that part of the world. But I thought it was just the funniest thing in the world that when I go to these monasteries and I sit down and I'm talking to these monks, that what they offer me for a beverage is a Red Bull. I was so buzzed on caffeine after I met with 3 of them in one day. But, and you don't want to say no because you don't want to be disrespectful to their hospitality. So you just drink the Red Bull and then move on. But it was funny. At least 4 of the monks served us Red Bull out of the 6.
Are you being serious that it's Red Bull, or was it?
Yeah, no, dead serious. It was Red Bull. That's what they brought us out.
I had no idea that it started in Thailand.
Yeah, no, we're sitting there with our legs crossed on the ground, bowing to the monk and sipping on a Red Bull. It was really,
awesome.
really kind of an odd juxtaposition of, ancient and modern, all in one sitting,
I have so many people in my life who chastise me because I drink the occasional energy drink. They tell me how bad it is for me. Well, now I have a good defense.
Yeah.
They're
monks. Yeah, the
He's
monks
very
even drink it. They serve it to their guests, right? So so that was really neat. But yeah, if you're ever over in that part of the world, that's a very popular drink over there.
I was terrified that you're going to say it was some kind of an exotic tea or something.
Yeah. Oh, like something psychedelic or something.
Yeah,
no, it was just good old Red Bull. Just
Yeah.
good old Red Bull. But it was, I just about laughed. I could hardly contain myself from laughing when I saw what they brought out.
Oh my God. Well, so I'm guessing English is the common language, or is there a different common language that you had to learn to work with these experts from around the world?
Well, it really depends, Bill. I mean, most of these places, there are people that speak English, or else there are interpreters that we use to translate for us. A lot of times, especially for the projects that we're working on with the World Monument Fund, we're working in conjunction with the U.S. State Department. And so they have people that know the local language, and they help us navigate local customs and things like that. But learning a little bit of languages goes a long way, though. I mean, just knowing how to say hello in somebody's native tongue, even if you don't know much more than that, is really helpful. And, I would say that, when we were doing that flood wall design in Thailand, that was really a neat process, because I was working directly with the guy who was the director of the Fine Arts Department in Thailand. That's basically the equivalent of the director of the National Park Service in the US, because that's who manages all their sites. And this guy didn't speak a word of English, and I hardly spoke a word of Thai, but when we would set an engineering drawing down on a table in front of us, and we would both point at things with our pen, and we would write down numbers or things like that, we were communicating as effectively as I've communicated with anybody, because we both spoke a common language of math and engineering drawings. And so it was really neat. I've never found that the language is a really big barrier. I speak a little bit of Spanish, not very well, but enough to try. And I always try in these other countries to just learn at least a few words. Please and thank you. Hello, please and thank you gets you a long ways, And and so that's been fortunate, and I've also been lucky that when I need it, to always have people that are good translators with me.
I think just talking with you, I could talk with you for days. Just talking with you, this is awesome. This is what I wanted. So we've been doing this series for over 3 years. We started, I was out in Denver, Colorado when COVID hit for us. In fact, I had seen you that trip, like March of 2020.
Yeah.
And you were one of the first people to give me a heads up about it coming. And I was at Federal Highway. And I think I was with, I can't think of her name right now, Opal. I was with Opal at Federal Highway. And they came in and started cleaning the room and kind of kicking us out. So I went over to my next appointment at CDOT. So I was at Colorado DOT, and they had people that came in and said, you got to end the meeting like right now, and wiped it down as we were leaving. And I remember you talking about your experience late in the year before that. So late 2019, going to China. Yeah. And I thought right then I got a glimpse of you are a world traveler, but I didn't have time to talk to you much about it. Yeah. And so when I saw you at the IECA Mountain States chapter in Colorado, and you gave me your calendar, which is awesome with beautiful pictures, I knew I wanted to talk to you about this, and we're just barely scratching the surface.
Yeah.
But you're helping us, your audience, connect with, why do we do what we do? What is the history of our profession? How can we use our skills to really make a difference? Because we all have to pay our bills. We all have projects where we have to have billable hours. And that can wear on us and get kind of not fun. But these adventures, these trips of yours, I could see where it would just become a passion, and you would look forward to the next one. So I think you said Kathmandu is the next one. Are you allowed to tell us anything about what
I think I can share a little bit. I'm still waiting to officially get under contract, but I've been helping out already with some background work. But the World Monument Fund is working with the Nepalese government in Kathmandu to try to preserve some ancient step wells, is what they basically are. These are features that they call hitis, Hitis. They're also known in the native language as Dungi-Dara is the other term for them. But basically what they are is they're, anywhere from, 2 to 3 meters deep. Maybe some of them are a little deeper than that, but they just basically are these almost like bathtubs that dig into the alluvial aquifer, right? And many of them date back to the 4th or 5th century AD. They've been a part of Kathmandu's water supply for 700 years or more. They're threatened now because you've had a lot of urbanization around the areas. These fountains were historically fed by a shallow alluvial aquifer. Of course, when you start paving things and adding imperviousness and drainage pipes, you don't recharge the shallow alluvial aquifer anymore. And so a lot of these have dried up. Some of the other ones don't drain out anymore. They just pool water and become kind of cesspools. And so what we're going to be doing, and there are over 100 of them. And so I think there might be several hundred of them actually. And so what we're going to do is to work with WMF and the local people in Nepal to kind of try to develop a systematic approach for identifying these and identifying how they can be restored. And the idea is that we're going to pick out probably a couple of them that have the greatest potential for restoration and some of the greatest cultural significance, weighing a lot of different factors. I mean, can we be successful restoring them? Are they important to people? All sorts of technical and non-technical criteria. And then we're going to try to use a couple of those as an example of how to do a restoration project, how to develop the methods of analysis that need to go into it, how to develop the local knowledge and technical expertise so that local people can do this. And we're going to try to kind of give them a couple of good examples working with the Nepalese on these, so that then hopefully they can then go and take that and repeat it in the future on others, to kind of preserve this important historical water supply that they have. And it's never going to be a large portion of the water supply of Kathmandu, but these areas are of cultural significance. They're used during festivals. And for some people, they are the source of water that's closest and most local and easiest to use. So they may not solve all of Kathmandu's water problems, but they certainly can be a part of the solution, while also preserving history. And that's really what my objective will be there.
I love it. I love it. That's the only way to have it be sustainable is to have it be repeatable and to have it reasonable that the locals can do it with what resources they have.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes we get caught up. Here's another thing. I'm not trying to knock on the U.S. I love our country, but that's another thing where we sometimes overdo things to an extreme where we might not even solve the problem, but we are checking all the boxes for legal and political goals that we spend $1 bazillion and take a long time, and we might still have an issue afterwards. Whereas some of this stuff comes down to just real basic things, taking care of yourself, taking care of your water, taking care of your community. I love it. I love what you're doing. And I could see where it would be hard for you to leave a place. I have my own personal experience in the U.S. and a couple of Central American, what I call mission trips, where we were going after natural disasters and doing cleanup, restoration, and some reconstruction. But your heart, you leave a piece of your heart there, right?
Yes.
And you want to go right back, but you might somewhere else. So how much of a say do you get on where you go, or is there a big committee for this World Monuments Fund or WPI, or how much of a say do you have in where you go next, or are you just along for the ride?
No, I mean, it's, a lot of the projects we get from WMF are really in response to what their needs are, and so those are really externally driven. But, from the folks I've talked with at World Monuments Fund lately, one of their real focuses moving forward is the history of water and preserving historical water systems. So, we've worked on, a lot of these projects I've showed you have been involved in historical water systems for the World Monument Fund. So they really understand the importance of that. Now, on the WPI side of things, we have all the control in the world because it's a nonprofit organization. I'm not on the board, but I'm a significant contributor to it. And, as an example there, I went on vacation a few summers ago. I took my family to France and we drove around and did a road trip and visited a lot of real neat sites. Well, one of the sites we visited was a site called Glanum, Glanum. It's outside of Saint-Remy, beautiful area, and it's been restored nicely. But the thing that's really neat, and the restoration is cool, you can walk around it, you can see water features, and that is really neat. And I had a great time being there as a tourist. But when you start reading about that site, it actually goes back to the Celtic times. So even before the Greeks, it was occupied by the Celtics, and they had a well there that started it all. And then the city was built upon by the Greeks. And then after the Greeks, it was built upon by the Romans. And the Romans built upstream of this city, just a very short distance, the world's very first, or what is believed to be the world's first concrete arch gravity dam. The French government dismantled that a number of years ago after they documented it because it was just in disrepair. But, this is a site that has been through 4 different civilizations at least, and they built on top one another. And so after I got back from that, I went to a board meeting for WPI. I showed them a bunch of pictures and I said, hey, we ought to study this site. And well, I'm authorized to study it. I have not had the time to get there and do that yet, but it's something that's on my list, and it's another site that I want to study. And what's interesting is that site's only about 10 kilometers away from the Barbagal mill site that my colleague Wayne Lorenz has worked on, and they're connected by an aqueduct. So that is another potentially interesting site we may get involved with, but it's just a matter of finding the time to do it, So
yeah, because this is not only the history of our profession with water, but it's the history of our world, all
It
of our
is.
civilization.
It is. Yeah, you wouldn't have any civilizations without being able to manage water.
Well, I would love to go be your errand boy, but you said you
Yeah.
already have a lot of volunteers.
Oh, we have a waiting list, I'm pretty sure, but
I don't have a bachelor's degree. You've got PhDs. I'm not worthy.
no, but no, we love anybody who's interested, though, honestly, Bill, and you know, contributing ideas is always a good way to contribute, and everybody has unique and different perspectives that are important. And I always learn things when I involve other people. You know, if I just do it all myself, I'm kind of have my blinders on. I need to hear what other people are hearing or thinking or had their ideas, because it helps me shape my own ideas, and it's always valuable.
Even when you're talking to the locals, like you're talking to the monks, you're talking to the people who their family lineage, their whole identity is in that community, and they don't have to have any kind of a formal education. You can learn some wonderful things from them.
Oh,
like
tremendous amount.
When you landed, you got to go see, it was raining, so you didn't need to have language to go see where the water ran.
Yes.
But then to hear the stories or to understand the value from the, that's priceless. I love that.
Yeah, you have to talk to them to understand why is it important, you know. I mean, we can imagine why it's important, or it might be interesting to me as a hydraulic engineer for some reason, but why it's important to me doesn't matter. What matters is why it's important to the people that live there, you know, and if we can make it and preserve that, we're doing something not only for them, but for the rest of us as just civilization by preserving history and learning from it.
Yeah, well, you're a fascinating person. I won't keep kissing up to you, but I've always told my kids, it's kind of, I don't know if it's Maya Angelou that said that. People won't remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel.
Yeah.
Another thing I always tell my kids is let's add value everywhere we go, and anyone we deal with. Let's try to leave them better than we found them.
Yeah.
And whether that's just picking up trash on a trip or we're on a vacation and picking up trash around a monument or a parking lot, or we're just hearing the stories of the people and meeting them where they're at. I love adding value, and you're answering the call, the higher call of where can you use your skills and talents for the greatest need. There's not a more noble profession in my mind than to help others. I love it.
I think that's at the root of everything, whether you're an engineer or in any other professions. It's about helping other people, and it can be in small ways, it can be in large ways, it can be in all sorts of different ways. But I think that philosophy of always thinking, what can I do to make the situation better, or what can I do to make this person feel better, or make this person have a better sense of pride about what their culture has achieved. That national identity and cultural pride is an important part of all of this, and it's something that it's a combination of little things and big things. And but you're right. If you don't do the little things, you'll never do the big things.
Yeah, it's really neat. So I think that the more you give, the more you're getting back. So you probably feel, you said you feel blessed. All of these things fill your cup and you overflow, and it fuels you to just keep going, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, this picture of the Buddhist monk up reminds me of the principle of karma, which is something that I really believe in. And you're probably familiar with that too, but it's what you give is what you get, right? I mean, and that is a real fundamental tenet to most Buddhist philosophy. And it's also a tenet to Christian philosophy. It's just stated a little differently. But it's, whether you're a Buddhist or a Christian or a Hindu or even or a Muslim, whatever your creed is, I think that is a good doctrine to live by. And I think it's really an objective of most of these religions is you get back what you give. It might not be immediate, but in the balance of the universe, that's how things work.
And like you said, some word it differently, but they all have their own versions of the golden rule.
They do.
And I think they all have their own versions of to whom much is given, much is expected.
Yes, it is. Exactly. It's really neat. I mean, if 4 of the world's major religions come up with that idea, it's probably a real darn good idea.
Exactly. Oh man, you've just blessed me so much. I appreciate this.
Thanks, Bill. I've enjoyed chatting with you too. It's been fun.
Well, friends, how about that? Oh my goodness. You could tell I was super excited, and I still am. So let me do this really quickly. I'm going to look for Mr. Andrew Earles. There he is. Okay, so I'm going to promote him to panelist. And guys, we've got a Q&A in here. I don't see my camera on there, but maybe I see Andrew on there. Let's see if I can get this going.
Well, let me just to kind of start and dive into
next. Okay, Andrew, are you on here with us?
I am. I'm just getting my video and audio turned on.
Hope you guys enjoyed the nice discussion with Bill. It was sure fun to get to spend some time with him talking about this.
Well, I'm going to move this box. I think I have a box in the way for everybody else. It's a quite Q&A box. Let's see if I can move that. It's probably showing up here that shouldn't be. I don't know if that's better for our viewers. I tell you, Andrew, it just felt like old friends having a conversation, and we let people come into the living room and just sit in there with us.
Yeah.
And so,
It's
yeah,
amazing what you can do online these days, isn't it?
it's so crazy. So anonymous attendee asked for PDH certificate. Yes, stay tuned for the survey and answer that when the email comes. You'll get a PDH certificate. Professional licensure implications in working or recommendations across the globe. You know, that's such a USA question, and I understand it and I appreciate it. Andrew, does that ever come up? Does your professional license ever come up when you're traveling? I'm sure it does as Wright water engineers, but does it with WPI or the WMF?
You know, it really depends on the nature of the project and where you're working. I mean, different countries have different systems of licensure, and you know, in some places don't, but you know, most I'd say many countries have some form of licensure or a professional being sure that professionals are qualified to do what they do. So I'm not licensed in foreign countries, but I also don't do a whole lot of design work. I usually give it ideas to the people locally there who are doing the design work and kind of act more in a peer review role and let them do a lot of the work, which helps with that issue. But you know, certainly doing work, I mean, anywhere you're doing design work as an engineer, you need to be sure you're licensed with the local authorities. That's step number one.
Well, and thank you for that. One of our viewers said, wow, 3 Red Bulls, you had to be zipping around. And we
Yeah.
talked about that. You know, I went from thinking it was a psychedelic tea, like you said. I love what you said during the interview. You said it was a juxtaposition of ancient and modern, but you had to
Yes.
be an honorable guest.
Yeah, no. Well, 3 Red Bulls definitely did have me kind of flying. I do not drink that much caffeine on most days.
So it didn't carry over to something you do now on a daily basis.
No, thank goodness.
Thank goodness. Um, one of them gets a little bit deep. Well, I think maybe that'll be one that we answer in writing, talking about cataclysm and devastated societies 12,000 years ago.
Mhm.
I think that could be deeper. I don't know that we can have time to address that today. Is that we're capturing all of these in writing, and we'll share them all with you, Andrew, and we would ask you to please help us answer them in writing by sometime early next week. Will that be okay?
Depends how many there are.
Yeah.
I'll do my best. Let's put it
Yeah,
that
same
way.
here. You know what? We'll share them all with everybody, and we'll do the best we can to acknowledge them. But I'm going to ask you about: did you have to work through any permitting processes or regulatory review on any of these projects?
You know, and every one of them, they were reviewed by the local authorities. I mean, we were working, you know, you just don't go do work in foreign countries unless you're working with the local agencies and local governments in close cooperation.
Yep.
So, you know, we went through the processes that they had, but I will tell you that most foreign countries don't have, you know, the types of permitting processes we have in the United States. I mean, it's not, you know, a 1, 2, 3 review where you submit a preliminary and you get comments, a final and you get comments. It's really, at least in many of the places where I've worked, much more poorly defined. And, you know, that to me is one reason why on all of these projects, I always try to get a lot of peer review because, you know, sometimes when you have, well, good criteria you can hang your hat on, or you have a local review agency and they have a manual that you can go by that, you know, gives engineers some protection. But when you don't have those things, you just need to be darn sure you're applying good judgment. And at least for me, that always means asking other people what their thoughts are too, and being sure that I get their input and reflect that in my final analysis.
Absolutely. Andrew, if you haven't met him yet, someday I'm going to introduce you to my friend Tyler Searle from Muscle Wall. He said very cool
I met
discussion.
Tyler before. Yeah, he came to, I think it was a fire class that we did, a post-fire class we did after the Marshall Fire in Boulder a while back.
He's a wonderful friend. He lives out there in Colorado too, but he thanks us for this discussion, and so does Tom Elting. In addition to those folks, those friends thanking us, somebody asked about health and safety. What concerns and how do you address health and safety when you're traveling to these other countries?
Oh my God, that's a good one. Yeah, no, you really have to be mindful of your surroundings at all times and be prepared. You know, I always travel with the first aid kit, and I've used it a few times on other people and on myself. I actually got bit by a dog in Thailand and had to go to the hospital and get rabies shots. It wasn't a bad bite, but it punctured the skin, and and they don't vaccinate dogs in Thailand. So I was
No,
on
I
a
didn't know that.
2-week, 2.5 week trip to Asia, and so I had to get my first shot in Thailand, and then I had to get another shot in Cambodia. And
Oh
then
my
when I got
goodness.
back to the US, I had to get my third shot. And the people at Kaiser Permanente were like, boy, you're the first real rabies victim we've had in a long time. It's usually some woman who picks up a bat in her garage or
Right,
something, But
right.
that wasn't much fun. But you're there and you have a plan if those things happen, and where the nearest hospital or thing is. And in that case, actually, the project was through the U.S. State Department, so I had wonderful support. I mean, the next day, the embassy doctor called me and asked how I was doing and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, you have to be prepared and look out for yourself.
You do, and my adventures were never as awesome and it's just amazing as yours globally. Mine were most in the U.S. My mission trips and 2 in Central America. But you nailed it. One of the first things we do in planning or when we arrive is to identify where is the nearest hospital. You just have to, and
Yeah,
how
you
to
need to know.
contact any kind of emergency service, whether it be police, fire, whatever. Here in the U.S. we're so after decades of 911, that's what we have. Um, you don't have that in other countries. You better know how to do it. So thank you. I stole this from WPI's website
Yeah.
to further the knowledge of past civilizations through the study of ancient water management and practices. You made a mention of some documents that were found 4,000 years ago, right? That just blows my mind. And the people have been dealing with the same challenges for thousands of years, just like you said.
Yeah. As long as there have been people, we have been managing water.
It's just incredible. Selfishly, I'm going to go through a couple. I hope you don't mind that I stole that slide from WPI. I just
No,
knew
no
that
problem.
it connects with what you do. Selfishly, I'm going to make a plug for our next month's webinar with my friend Sally Ortiz. Her travels are around Iowa, so not quite as exotic as the globe, but it's kind of a neat journey. And finally here, we're going to end up back in Andrew's home state of Colorado on February 8th. But friends, we're doing our Clean and Green seminar series through 2024 through February and March, and you can see the locations there. If you have a phone, let me move this little control bar. I think I have that in the way. People can sign in for that. I think we get anywhere from 5 to 7 PDHs, depending on which location and which day they're going to go. Andrew, thank you so much. I appreciate you, my friend.